Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag and drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way.
La Grande Illusion, un aspect encore peu connu de la guerre. C'est, d'après des récits authentiques, la vie des prisonniers de guerre en Allemagne.
I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
The Grande Illusion is over. Don't shoot. We're in Switzerland.
La Grande Illusion, avec Jean Gabin. Tita Parlot.
Le café est prêt.
Pierre Freinet.
D'un côté, des enfants qui jouent aux soldats, et de l'autre, des soldats qui jouent comme des enfants.
Et Eric von Stroheim.
Hi.
Welcome back from, well, I guess it's not hiatus.
It's not hiatus, and that's what this is podcast magic. We have not podcasted together in many moons. But thanks to Friday, Ice Cube filled in some blanks for us.
Yes, he did.
Thank you, Ice. And so we are back recording, and we're starting a new series. And we've done longer series in the past. This one's one of the longer ones. We'll be in this zone for a couple months. Mm-hmm. But I think it's safe to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's safe to say that this is the most exhaustive prep work you have ever done for any individual series. Is that fair?
exhaustive prep work that I've ever done, and am still doing. Yes. That is fair to say.
This is one where you've watched 450 movies so that we could talk about 10 of them. Can you talk to us a little bit about what this series is and what the hell you've been doing?
Oh, dear. Yes. This is, with Parasite being the first foreign language film to win Best Picture, it kind of hit a place for us where, like, you know what? There have been 11 films nominated for the Best Picture award over at the Academy Awards. Wouldn't it be fun to do a series? Now, we've talked about one of them. We talked about The Immigrants in a Listener's Choice episode several years ago, but wouldn't it be fun to look at the other 10 films and kind of explore this whole world of foreign language films getting nominated for Best Picture? So that is the current series. And, it's a really interesting series, I think, to be jumping into since Parasite did win. I think it is interesting. It highlights the fact that in reality, there are actually very few films that have received this recognition. Thus far, there have been 563 films that have been nominated for Best Picture since the creation of the Academy Awards. That is not even 2% of the total of those films that have been foreign language films. Now, it is, I think, fair to say that obviously the Academy Awards, they were created by the Hollywood studio moguls in the 1920s, and the intention was to kind of recognize the films in the system that they had created, to create more buzz for those films, to sell more tickets for those films. To that end, I mean, that's kind of how awards are created. There are now different awards all around the world from different organizations. They all tend to lean towards specificity, whichever country they're from. There are certain types of films, animation or horror, or, there have been rise for, film awards for, like, the Black Filmmaker Awards, things like that. There's whole varieties of them. But with the Academy Awards, I think it's hard to ignore that, sometimes the greatest films aren't necessarily the ones coming out of the studio system. So 1938, that's where we're kicking off. The first foreign language film gets nominated for Best Picture. And then over the course, and this was at a time when there wasn't even an Academy Award yet for Best Foreign Language Film. That started in 1957. Between 38 and 57, there were some honorary Oscars given to some foreign language films. But, this is a series of films that obviously had to do something really special to kind of get up into that top category of Best Picture when they did. So we're here to look at them, see what we think.
Well, now that was all great, but you didn't at all address.
Oh, yeah. I kind of skipped over that whole thing.
Your personal craziness, and I think you need to take a little bit of responsibility on the show for the fact that you haven't seen your wife and children in 6 weeks.
Oh, well, okay.
And I asked seriously because it seems like you come equipped to have a different kind of conversation, certainly than I do, having not done the research, but at least to talk a little bit about some lessons learned. So just set the stage. How have you personally approached this series, and do you have any thoughts wherever you are that would help us sort of kick off? What are we looking for?
Well, yeah. And so what I personally did, and I guess that was your initial question, and I just went off on a tangent there. But what I did is because of the nature of this, I thought, we've talked a lot about we've had a lot of series where we've looked at a lot of varieties of films. If I can, and if it relates, I'd like to try kind of getting a sense of the perspective in context of that. And so for this particular series, I was like, you know what? I should be able to say, especially since Parasite now, we have had a winner of a foreign language film actually winning not just the Best Foreign Language, which is now the Best International Film Award, but also Best Picture. Watch all the other films that had been nominated in these years, these 10 years that we're going to be looking at, to say, did the right picture win? is Grande Illusion, should it have won back in 1938 so I watched all of the films that they were nominated against, and that's for Best Picture. And in the case where they were also nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, I also watched the films in those categories as well. So there has been a little bit of movie watching in context of this particular series.
You said you're still in the middle of it.
I am. I'm going
to have to the end. Are we going to catch up with you? Are you like the George R. R. Martin of Game of Thrones?
I'm not quite that bad. No, I'm actually real close. I think, let me check. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more films to watch.
That's pretty good.
It's not too bad. And, I think considering that these are all 95 and later, I think I can get them all watched before we hit each of those particular years. So excellent. I think I will be able to be fully prepped for our conversation when we get to each of those movies.
All right. So that brings us to The Grande Illusion. 1938, directed by Jean Renoir, the filmmaker, the part of the Renoir artistic dynasty, and it is a movie that I had never seen. I did not read anything before the movie, and I was surprised at some of the turns that this movie took. I thought it seems like every beat. I thought, oh, now I know what this movie is. I get it, and then it turns out I didn't get it. It was a treat to watch. I have a few, we'll say, quibbles to stay on theme, but I overall I enjoyed it. How did it hit you?
I have seen this film a number of times over the years since film school when it was first presented to me. I have found with each subsequent viewing I get more out of it. I find it to be a richer, more powerful film. There's a lot of really interesting things happening within the film. And I don't know, it strikes me as definitely kind of a film for the ages, one that I don't think, like some of the other films that were nominated for Best Picture in 1938, this is a film that does not necessarily feel dated. It feels like a something that is going to stand the test of time and will continue finding a way to live on and move forward and become always be relevant, I guess. It's just I just find it to be really an incredible film, and even better than when I watched it last time, which wasn't too long ago.
Well, so the film, first watch, it's a prison escape movie. We get some members of a French crew who are captured and taken to a German camp, and over the course of subsequent scenes, we get the sense that there is escape afoot. They're digging a tunnel. I thought, we're going to dig tunnels and escape from prisons. I get that. I know what that's like. We've spent some fair time in the sewers. I know where this is going. It turns out it's very much more than that, and I think in the experience of being more than that, a story of class, definitely a story of culture and cultural conflict. It's weirdly a story of I don't even know how to put the words right. It is there is a sense of geniality and politeness applied to war crimes and competing sides in a particularly grim world war that I found curious. I wasn't quite sure what the ideology of the film was trying to convey. And so I had some fun kind of muscling my way through that. But I left the film feeling a little bit undone. Like it didn't quite make the statement that I wanted it to make. Whose side is the film on?
Well, that's I think that's an interesting question, and certainly something that triggered people when the film came out in the late 30s and then subsequent re-releases, because it did get banned by a number of places. The film is really, there's a lot of social class in the film. And that was something that Renoir had seen, somebody who, he actually fought in World War I and based the kind of the story he had here on a number of stories that he had heard from friends and acquaintances that he knew in the time of war. And, he saw a lot of kind of the social class structure, the aristocracy that we have with Bourdieu and Rothenstein, the kind of the more elite characters. And then we have kind of the working class, but everybody's kind of getting along. And so it was this film that triggered a lot of people because here we have Germans and French kind of getting along with each other. And it just didn't seem appropriate when, you have to look at a film about the period that it takes place in this particular case, World War I, but you also have to look at it at the time it gets made. And that's right before World War II. And I think it triggered a lot of people that this was a film that was showing French people and German people getting along with each other. Germany didn't like this film, for a lot of those reasons. And in fact, when they invaded France, apparently this was one of the things that Goebbels had said was, I can't remember the exact words, but here is cinematic public enemy number one, and apparently ordered the prince to be confiscated and destroyed. And because of this kind of like friendlier nature of war, where it was, there was manners and it was, there was a lot of sympathy for each other. And,
and respect, right?
Respect,
That's very much what this communicates, is the respect of rank. And I'm curious how that, why that has aged, we'll say as a curiosity and not a mark of offense for me, that it does demonstrate overtly that these two sides, these two kernels can have this sort of respect interpersonally when they're face to face. And yet the Germans were still able to shoot down their plane. Like, they're the same people when they were in the plane that they are now sitting across the dinner table, welcoming them to prison.
Mm-hmm.
I found that really interesting. And so I think part of that curiosity is like, when you apply the lens of our current, let's say, social media landscape, how easy is it to hate watch and rant, online? And then when you meet somebody that you might otherwise be, ranting at online, the mark of civility might set in, one would hope. It's the mark of the personal relationship. And I think that was an interesting thing that's at work in this movie in 1938. I was surprised to see that sort of perspective.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of that actually in like Zero Dark 30.
No. Right.
Decidedly different tactics.
Decidedly different tactics. That's absolutely true. I've been, over the last month, I've been watching a lot of The Americans, and I had not seen that whole show. And so, I've binged many seasons of it. And that's the same thing. I've been it was a curious sort of comparison to watch this movie in the middle of watching that show, where we're using that perspective to really demonstrate the lengths to which we will go to hurt one another, and how that's changed over 8 decades.
Truly, yeah. I just find it fascinating that there was this time that people kind of acted this way in wartime. And I think that's really what Renoir was getting at here, is that, and it comes through several times. Obviously, there's the scope of the war and France and Germany. And I mean, we have some Americans, there's a lot of different soldiers, Russians, that are all kind of in these various camps. We see a lot of them. We get a lot, not Americans, sorry, British soldiers. There's a lot of these different people, but then we have the social class structure, right? We've got kind of the working man that we see in the vast majority of them, and the aristocracy. But Renoir is also saying, but we're all human. And that's really what it is. He really was trying to make a story that's really humanistic, that says, there is this human, kind of this humanity that we all share, that allows us to say, when you put all this other stuff aside. And this is something that I've always struggled with in the film, but I think it really started connecting with me this time when we have Marshall and Rosenthal end up at this woman's house at the end of the film, and almost kind of create this sense of family And even though they don't speak the same language, they're on different sides. But here they are, able to just let all that go. She's lost her husband and 3 of her brothers, all to various wars. And they've escaped prison and they're on the run through the German countryside. And here they have this moment at Christmas time where they're just allowed to be human. And nothing else matters. And it's a very touching and tender last act of the film that kind of says, you know what, if we can get past all of that, and if we can just kind of not worry so much about that and just realize, hey, they're all just other humans here, it's going to allow us all to just kind of find a way to get along and create a better world for ourselves. And I mean, it's interesting because I think he makes this film saying all of that while also acknowledging that, there are these machinations working that kind of keep this thing running. And we're never going to actually get there. Social class may be changing, the aristocracy may be falling, and our 2 aristocrats kind of realize that. But at the same time, this whole machine of war that is kind of run by the governments is always going to be a thing. If we can get through it by being human and creating those relationships, yeah, it absolutely is the message of the film. And you're right. It's such an interesting thing to look at through today's perspective and say, the exact same thing applies online. The exact same thing applies. Black Lives Matter. Whatever it is, there's a way to kind of look at it and go, this is a message that is relevant today. And this film is showing us that.
Well, I mean, you look even at the relationship that he portrays, and you've already sort of mentioned it, the Beaulieu and Rauffenstein relationship, right? We have 2 colonels who are, in place of power in their particular outfits, right? We have Beaulieu, who in the prison camp is treated with the respect of rank, and Rauffenstein is obviously the head of that camp. And we have these wonderful exchanges where Rauffenstein gets to communicate just how brave he thinks it is that these guys come to his camp having attempted escape, right? Mm-hmm. That it is that perspective that I would have done the same thing had I been in your shoes. That was a brave thing to try to do. You're not going to get away from it here. You're not going to be able to do what you think you're going to be able to do here. I have a special place for you. And that, of course, launches the camp escape narrative for us in the second half of the movie. But it also takes us to the end of the film where these 2 guys have to sort of face off. One is running and one is pulling the trigger. And we get to see just how hard that is. That's demonstrated on screen as a thing that is difficult for Rauffenstein to do, to draw his weapon on this guy, knowing that he both respects it and has to do his duty. I thought that was very powerful.
Absolutely.
Although, and this is the conflict, right? Simple, right? Like that I think is part of the conflict that I feel about the movie, that it is all done in a way that I find really beautiful and respectful. And also, perhaps this is the heart of the conflict around the movie. It has been so distilled, these relationships, and so simplified that it's easy for me to see why, this is kind of grist for the mill of cultural conflict.
I think there's a lot to all of that. And I think it also speaks to the fact that, here we have Beaulieu, who has, I feel like he has kind of recognized it. It pops up several times in his conversations between him and Maréchal, where, they have a lot of beautiful moments together where they're very little spoken, but you can get a lot of from what just their looks and that they're kind of sharing. Bouldieu seems to kind of have realized his place as an aristocrat. Here he has Rosenthal, this Jewish prisoner, who he's kind of this nouveau riche who's, his family has bought all these old castles and everything that he's talking about. And Bouldieu is somebody who's an aristocrat who was kind of from that world, but now that's on the decline. And I think he sees it. And I think that's what is an interesting moment, playing that moment between him and Rauffenstein. that, he's recognizing it. And maybe Ralph Winstein isn't quite ready to recognize that the aristocracy is kind of on its way down. And, I think that's something that Bourdieu kind of triggers him to use as a kind of as the reason why he makes that decision to kind of stand up for Marechal and Rosenthal so they can escape while he's doing his...
Well, right. Nobody in their merry band would have been a better foil for the distraction, right? That's the whole illusion. That is the grand illusion, is to have this aristocrat and colonel make a big fuss and climb out on the terrace and run across the rocks and attempt to escape, knowing full well that he's not going to be able to succeed. There are just too many soldiers, and it's too difficult terrain to be able to do that quickly and get out. But he's also cleared the way for these guys who have woven together fabric and made their own rope to actually take the one way out and climb out the window and scale the 120-foot, facade of the castle and make their way to safety. And that starts the sort of the last major run to the end of this movie, which is the relationship of these two guys, as you already mentioned, their relationship with Elsa, as they, try to get out of Germany. Yeah. Another interesting bit, right, where we have them now. We're dealing with this as sort of the depths of suffering and interpersonal friendship, where we have to say, here's a guy with an injury. Here are these two guys who now are totally sick of each other. And again, it's a beautiful relationship, but it's also been distilled and simplified so many times that this is the part of the film that I found myself a little bit fatigued. I feel like I'd already gotten it. And their escape, I think, could have been a little bit more abbreviated. I'm not sure that it makes the film feel so much more stuffed to add this whole additional character, this whole additional arc that I feel like was too short to be fully realized and too long to be. To add much to the actual escape.
But she gets second billing, Pete.
Which is weird, right? Do you have any, where does that even come from?
I don't know. I'm just assuming that Dita Parlow was the bigger name at the time. That's just kind of my guess.
Word is that Orson Welles deeply wanted Dita Parlow to play Kurtz's mistress in Heart of Darkness, which is, quote, the greatest film he never got to make, Orson Welles.
My name is Dita. I'll be your mistress tonight. Dita also inspired Madonna for her erotica character. Just that's a little side note.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
I didn't see much of a hint of that character in this movie.
Maybe more in the actress than in this performance. It's interesting. Just going back to your point, though, I did find that same feeling I always had watching this film up until this latest viewing, when the ending finally kind of clicked in place for me. And then I was like, really, I don't know, I just found it really worked. It kind of brought everything together for me in that final part of the film. And so, but I totally get
how so. What was it that shifted? Because you know how I delight in our banter when you tell me that I just haven't watched the film enough times.
That's right. I know. Hey, and clearly you haven't watched all these other films too. So
clearly I come at an obvious deficit.
It was just, there's something about, I feel like I had always struggled with this whole thing where it's just like, we've got this great prison kind of POW camp film that kind of evolves to a prison escape film. And then all of a sudden it kind of takes this break as they have this kind of relationship at the end. And it always seemed kind of like this odd pause before we get to the kind of the final moments of the film. And so I don't know, I guess this time it was just, I felt a lot more of the relationship. Like I felt with Marechal and his escape and everything that he had kind of seen Bourdieu. Like I think it was because he and Bourdieu have all these looks at the end where Maréchal, when Bourdieu says he's not coming, he's going to be the one who kind of is the distraction. And he and Maréchal have a number of looks about kind of everything that is about to take place. I just find that their relationship, like Maréchal is recognizing something in Bourdieu, that what Bourdieu is giving to him as kind of this, he's recognizing him as somebody who is more than, like he's the guy who's worth saving, not necessarily Bourdieu, who is the aristocrat. And normally you'd say the aristocrat is the one who would see himself as the one more worth saving than kind of the low worker. And I found this time that Maréchal kind of recognizes that Bourdieu is seeing something in him, and there's this humanity that he kind of pulls from that. And then when he ends up in this house with Elsa and her daughter, I don't know, I just found like he kind of took that humanity and recognized it as something that he allowed to kind of create this relationship with. And they had this pseudo family Christmas with everybody kind of celebrating and everything, with their little manger scene and everything. And I don't know, I guess it was just this connection to the human side that I felt like Maréchal maybe hadn't connected with until those moments with Bourdieu. And then this was his chance to kind of show that to us. So that's, I think, why it worked so much more for me this time.
I totally get the intention of that. I can feel that in the movie. It got me feeling like if we saw this part of the film, this last 15, 20 minutes of the film blown up to 3 hours, we would have had The Emigrants, right? I mean, it's just that's where the heart and soul of this farmland family experience lives. And I thought it was fine as a coda to the film, and we needed to have, I think, something. I think there's something about these two guys and their experience crossing the countryside and having to, look out for patrols and that sort of thing. I was surprised that we had so little of that experience in this last little bit. We had one where they were scared when there was a knock on the window, and the happiest German soldier peeks in and says, "How far to the next town?" "Oh, well, it's about 8 miles." 8 miles? My, oh my, I better get walking.
That's right.
So I found that like those kinds of moments where I think that's a high point in my experience of simplicity of this film. I get what it's trying to do. I see it. But when you have those sorts of exchanges that have sucked all of the potential threat out of their hiding, out of the chase, I think it loses some of the weight. And I'm just not sure, at least in my first watch, I'm just not sure that their, family time Christmas candles on the tree actually makes up for what I needed in the climax of the film.
Sure. I can see that. Like I said, I was right there with you.
Were you more terrified for them, for example, about them being discovered by the Germans, or about the fact that, oh my God, it just came back to me that in the olden days you would actually put real candles on the tree, and that terrified me. That's an extraordinary fire hazard. Blow them out.
Right.
So. That was troublesome.
That was pretty funny.
Let's talk just briefly about Jean Renoir, can we?
Let's.
He says that he was very concerned with realism, his words, to the point, indeed, I asked Gabin to wear my old pilot's tunic, which I had kept after being demobilized. At the same time, I did not hesitate to add fanciful touches to certain details in order to heighten the effect. For example, von Stroheim's uniform. His part, which at first was a very minor one, had been greatly enlarged because I was afraid that confronted by the weighty personalities of Gabin and Fresnay, he would look like a lightweight. In art, as in life, it is all a question of balance, and the problem is to keep both sides of the scales level. What do we know of Jean Renoir's filmmaking? How does he stand for you as a realistic filmmaker?
Well, that's always been the description that I've heard of him and seen in his films. Everything is portrayed very realistically. If you look at this film, you look at Rules of the Game, anything that he's done, it very much has kind of this sense that, what's in the space is in the space. But I think something that always has been important to Renoir that you definitely see in this film, and it's so clear to me after rewatching this several times recently, how filmmakers like Wes Anderson have really pulled from him as a model in how he tells his stories. He's a filmmaker who views the world as not specifically like what's inside this 4x3 window is the world. And if it's not in that frame, then it doesn't exist. We've talked about that in a number of films that where, if it's in there, then it's obviously something that's, important. He is a filmmaker who sees the world as this big palette, and we're just seeing this little tiny window of it. And you see it quite a bit as he's panning. A lot of camera moves throughout this film as he's kind of panning and exploring things, and things are happening on screen and off screen that are relevant. And the way that he allows the real world to just kind of always be there, and we're only seeing a part of it, I think is a critical part of his filmmaking style, the way that he puts films together. And like I said, you look at Wes Anderson's movies, it's just, he really pulled that stamp from Renoir as to how the films are made. I think that it's, I don't know, I guess I just find that there is very much a sense of the real world and the way that things happen. It just all feels very much in kind of this particular style of filmmaking.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think I love that description that you give of his work. He's, to hear him talk about this movie specifically, he says, I took my characters into a POW camp. This too was a special kind of life, a life of luxury compared to that of the infantrymen in the trenches. I had no wish to depict the latter's sufferings. That was not the intention of this film. My chief aim was the one which I have been pursuing ever since I started to make films, to express common humanity of men. And that, I think, is, I absolutely get that out of this film. I see he set himself at an intention and he nailed it. And I can absolutely also see why that pisses people off, because in the form of, cinema verite, right? In the form of coming to experience, allowing film to be a window into the senses, this is not what we would expect. What he achieved is not what we would expect as a prison camp experience. And that disconnect opens a fairly wide door to criticism of what Renoir actually accomplished.
Not only that, he made a film about World War I that never shows a trench, never shows a battle. It's like, the only time we actually have kind of any actual battling or attacking is all off screen when Maréchal's plane is shot down. He leaves. And then we cut to Rauffenstein coming back saying, "Hey, I just shot this plane down. Let's go find out if they're captains, and then invite them to dinner if they are." And that's kind of that's the sense of his story, right? It's not about the war, and I think that also made people say, there was a lot of horror that happened in that war, and you're going to show people having tea and being all polite and everything. And I think it did make some people upset, but because he makes the experience of war an inconvenience. Yes,
and that is a real challenge of the movie. I think I still ended up overall enjoying my time with it, but I see its confusion.
And again, especially because this is right on the heels of World War II getting started. And
context
so it's
is
very much in people's minds that fascism was on the rise. And here we have these French soldiers sitting down and playing nice with these German soldiers. And it was a little frustrating for people. I think it got banned in France, and it got taken from France. It got banned in Germany, Italy, and Maybe it was also banned in France. I can't remember, but a number of places it got banned. And we're lucky the print survived. I mean, somehow an original negative was kept by somebody who knew what it was. And I think it was actually a German who realized what he had and enjoyed the movie. This was after Germany had taken it and actually smuggled it out to Moscow, where it was held for a very long time. And they finally realized what it was. And they were working with a French company, restoration company. And the two of them kind of were exchanging prints. And the French company got it in the 60s, but they didn't even realize it was the original negative until the 90s. So it's amazing that this film, that we have what we have now, considering the journey that it went on.
Superficial aside, did you notice anything funny about the credits?
Well, a few things. One, I really like the credits, how it's kind of this like they're falling. I thought that was a really cool design technique. But specifically, what are you referring to in the credits?
Well, Andy, every name was one name.
Not every name, but
every name. It felt like every name.
There was a lot of names.
Because it's like they're all Sade and Madonna. We have Carrette. Julien Carrette was listed as just Carrette. Georges Peclet was just listed as Peclet.
Right.
Jean Daste was just listed as Daste.
Right.
Sylvain Itkin was just Itkin. Modo Dalio, Marcel Dalio, our old friend, it was just listed as Dalio. But we get down into the credits. The editors were single name editors. Huguet and Marguerite were both listed as single names. Same thing with production design. Eugène Laurier was just Laurier. Decret for costume design, just one name. They're all Sade. I found that extraordinary. What kind of pool of talent and ego does Renoir put together to get a credits list like this? What was the trend that we were seeing in late 1930s?
I just imagine it. It's like this is going to be probably the first time this has been brought into conversation when we talk about Grande Illusion. But when you look at Three Amigos, you have the moment when the poor woman from the Mexican village is sending a telegram to the Three Amigos and doesn't quite have enough money to pay for every word. They just start cutting words out of the letter until they finally get to the letter that she can afford. Maybe, Pete, just maybe, the French titleists were charging by the word, and Renoir was using up his budget and said, you know what, I just can't afford paying for all those words, so just cut each of the names, these names in half.
You know, I didn't see that at first, but you're absolutely right. I'm sure it was budgetary. Okay. Anybody else you want to talk about specifically in the cast?
Well, I mean, we should talk. I mean, I don't think we've talked specifically about the cast. Jean Gabin is just, I think he has just, he's just a movie star right there. I tell you, has the face. I mean, fantastic actor. I've seen him only in a couple films, but I really love his screen presence. And he's Marechal, and I think he carries the humanity, I think, really well for that particular character.
Especially when he's ripped apart. You know, that we do have this bit where he's been separated. The escapes of Marechal, really come to the fore here, and I think watching his interaction with the prisoners inside gives us a little bit of a sense
when he's
of
in
that
solitary.
again. Yeah, that humanity, the humanity of men.
Exactly,
he's sort of the vessel for that.
Yeah, you don't see people in modern day prison films sitting down with compassion with the prisoners in solitary, giving them a harmonica and cigarettes. We already talked about Dita Parlo, Pierre Fresnay as Boldieu. I think it's funny because you see an actor like him, and I don't know, I'm just like, well, of course he's going to play the aristocrat. He looks like an aristocrat.
He looks like he was born with a silver pipe in his mouth.
Right. If there's ever an actor who is born, well, I should say this actually about Erich von Stroheim. If there's ever an actor who's born to be wearing a monocle, it's him.
And a neck and chin brace.
Right, for his spinal injury. Oh.
And that actually leads to another interesting costuming choice from Renoir, right? The idea was that, the way he talks about Stroheim's or Ruffenstein's costume was that, he enlarged it. He also put those sorts of affectations on it. And, like the brace, it was all stuff to give him such a sort of outsized, unrealistic presence next to Fresnay's Beaulieu, so that again he would balance the scales. Those choices are not necessarily in line with Renoir's realism; they are explicit choices to balance the scales on screen. And nowhere can you see it better than when these two characters are sitting together in the bay window and having a cigarette together, whatever. You see them side by side, and you can actually weigh the measure of these men next to one another in this in these specific shots. And I think it's particularly artful and strong.
His character, Raufenstein, I feel like is a character that I have known about my whole life without ever having seen him at least until college. But like that kind of military character with the stiff neck brace because of the spinal injury, with the monocle. I mean, I can't think of anything specific, but I feel like, there have to be like Looney Tunes kind of spoof characters that had that style, right? It's that there's something about the embodiment of that particular character that feels like something that we've all seen many times since in other forms.
Yeah, I wanted so badly to see, to see him with his arm in some sort of mechanical brace, because he felt like he's right out of Young Frankenstein, right? I mean, he was
Dr. Strangelove.
Dr. Strangelove, exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. I think, it's absolutely Inspector. What was his name? Inspector Kemp? Is it Inspector Kemp? Anyway, I think you're right. He created a caricature that has lived decades hence.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is Erich von Stroheim. We haven't even talked about really him as a person, but silent film director, just classic, great silent film director who, had some budgetary issues with kind of going over on some of his projects and spending a little more than he should. And so ended up kind of having troubles with the studio system. But he had made some incredible classics, including Greed. And then it also was acting in a lot of his own films and just a lot of other films that he would pop up in like this. We see him much later popping up in Sunset Boulevard, right? And I think that he's an actor who knew how to work with actors and knew how to give a lot to scenes because he had directed so much great stuff. I just love seeing him in this film, and just really anytime he's on screen.
Greed was the one that ended up having the 12-hour cut. Is that right?
Something like that.
Did that ever get released?
Something like that. They did a restoration of the film. I can't remember honestly how long the main version that like I saw in film school and stuff. There was a version that was probably 2 hours long, something like that. Mm-hmm. But AMC did or they played it. I don't know if they put it together, but there was a director's cut that, I don't know if it's fair calling it a director's cut, a restored version that was probably closer to 3 or 4 hours. And what they did when they put that together is they used lots of production stills and script and stuff to kind of piece it together. It was, I watched it. It was not a great experience because you're just like, it's almost like a film school watch, right? You're like, okay, so this is what should be here. Okay. Yeah. It was an interesting experiment, but, unless the film is, we kind of saw some of this when we watched the Judy Garland version of A Star is Born, where they inserted a lot of that sort of stuff. And it makes for a difficult watch. It pulls you out because all of a sudden you're very much learning about it instead of actually watching a film.
Well, I gave it too much. It looks like the original cut, his original cut was 7 hours long and nobody ever saw it.
Yeah.
So looks like the 4-hour quote restored cut is the best you could possibly do.
Yeah, right. That's what AMC was playing for a while.
But at least it answers the question why Erich von Stroheim has budget problems.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ran into that quite a bit with his films. Oh, Eric.
Okay. So who else did you want to talk about? We have the merry band of criminals and Rosenthal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they all are great actors. I enjoy all of them in their roles. I don't think I've seen any of them in anything else. None of them stand out as better than the others. I think they all work really well in their roles.
Camera, Christian Matras, Eugene Laurier, and production design. I think they did a tremendous job, especially for 1938.
And especially how Renoir wanted to move the camera. There were some beautiful camera moves throughout this film. Some great ones that were like you're watching something happen outside as people are talking, and then the camera trucks backward, and all of a sudden you've gone through a window, and now you're in an interior scene. Some just fantastic use of that. And this is back in the 30s when they needed a lot more light to kind of balance the two. I just was really impressed with what they pulled off here.
It was incredibly sophisticated, especially when they're on and, up in and below these trellises. Once we make it to the final castle, incredibly just mature use of space. I thought it was really terrific. I think it was, it's worth watching. Once you watch the film, enjoy the film for whatever, but really pay attention to what he is able to do with the camera, because it's really great. Yeah. It's a masterclass.
Really is. Truly. And the music, Joseph Kozma composed the music, and there are some just fantastic moments where I feel like the music just works really well in context of what we're watching. I really enjoy the score for this particular one.
I feel like we need to do at least some sort of, I don't know what we're going to brand this segment, but it should be a branded segment where you get to actually talk now about how it lines up with the other films from this particular year, since you've done all that homework.
Boy, I tell you, and this was back when the Academy Award Best Picture pool was rather large, 10 nominees in these early years before they started shrinking it. And, by the time we get to the end of this, we'll be back up quite high again. But in this, in this particular case, there were 10 nominees. The 10 nominated films were The Adventures of Robin Hood, Alexander's Ragtime Band, Boys Town, The Citadel, Four Daughters, Jezebel, Pygmalion, Test Pilot, and You Can't Take It With You, including, of course, Grande Illusion. So I watched all of these films. We've actually talked about The Adventures of Robin Hood on the show. We talked about it a year ago in our Robin Hood series. This is, of course, Michael Curtiz's. That was a lot of Robin Hood. That was the Michael Curtiz one, which I think arguably is toward the top of our list of the Robin Hood films. Alexander's Ragtime Band is kind of a biopic about a guy in his band. It was, I don't know, watching through all of these, it really struck me that this was definitely a different period as far as what people were getting really excited about. Boys Town, Spencer Tracy it's another biopic about a father who, as in a Catholic father, who starts up basically kind of a place for young boys to live who have been kicked out or run away from their families, and a young Mickey Rooney is a kid that he's trying to help. The Citadel is a story about a doctor who is it's an interesting look at the medical system at the time. Really kind of shocking the way that the medical system worked back then. That's largely what that is. Four Daughters is a father and his four daughters, and kind of the romances and everything going on with them.
Oh God, can you even imagine?
Oh, no, I can't.
God.
And that film was so popular, it spurred Four Wives, and then I think Four Mothers, I think are the three films in that particular series. Jezebel, Betty Davis, is a Southern belle with Henry Fonda as the man she falls for, and she is a little stinker, that Betty Davis, in that particular film. It wasn't a film that I was in love with. It was okay. Pygmalion, anyone familiar with the play or the musical version of it, that would certainly popularize it with Henry Higgins. That is a story that endlessly frustrates me, but I know a lot of people love it. And then Test Pilot is Clark Gable as a test pilot. This was an interesting story. I'd never even heard of this one. It's about a guy who's a test pilot in planes who you had to have a guy testing these planes to see if they would do what they're supposed to do. And he would have to put these planes to these insane tests and try to not die and eject in time and stuff. And it's kind of like, wow, that was a thing people did back then.
Sounds like just a horrible job.
Right?
Okay.
Right. And then, of course, you can't take it with you, the Frank Capra classic based on the play, which is, just about making your life worth it and, goofy families and Jimmy Stewart. It's a strong, for the time, list of films, but it's interesting looking at all of them, why you don't hear people talking about the vast majority of these films. Pygmalion Criterion has that in its collection. It's always kind of one that people talk about. A lot of the others, they'll pop up in best of 20th Century Fox sorts of lists and things like that. But I don't see a lot of push for those particular films other than The Adventures of Robin Hood and this. And, I don't know. You Can't Take It With You is the film that won Best Picture in this particular year. And before my recent several rewatches of this film, I would probably have said that was the right case. It was the better film. It's a very fun film. It's a very heart-filled, emotional kind of Frank Capra movie. But I don't know. After rewatching this several times, I would say, I would give it to Grande Illusion at this point. And honestly, some people might say Pygmalion, but other than that, and The Adventures of Robin Hood, there's nothing else on this list that I would put even close to the top.
That's interesting. I wonder how much of it was related at all to that sort of burgeoning post-war xenophobia. That there's no way a movie speaking German and French is going to win an award next to all of these other nominees.
Yeah. Well, the National Board of Review, they put it up as the best foreign film, and it was in their top foreign films list. Mm-hmm. And in their top films list, they really recognized the quality in this particular film. But if you look at a lot of the write-ups about the films nominated for Best Picture of the year, it's interesting that Grande Illusion always is like, oh, and they nominated a foreign film this year. It never seems to be a serious contender.
Yeah, there's nothing to say that a wide-eyed critic or organization of critics aren't going to really laud this film for what it is. But it does say that there is a sort of, again, cultural sort of barrier that we're constantly dealing with. Like you talked about in your opening discussion, that 2% of all of the films does not make a weighty representation of foreign language films. Obviously, Oscars over the years have other problems too. Right. It's not just getting non-English films in the list, but goodness, having more non-English films, it goes a long way toward rectifying some of the women and people of color problems that they have on the awards list. So.
Yeah. Now, granted, it was all white guys in this particular film too.
Exactly. That was not terribly helpful. Yeah. Right.
But other awards, like I said, National Board of Review, Best Foreign Film, Best Acting, they gave it that. The New York Film Critics Circle, Best Foreign Language Film. And then, interestingly, the Venice Film Festival, they actually snuck this in right before things shifted in Italy and the film was banned. They awarded Jean Renoir with the Best Overall Artistic Contribution with his film. And they nominated it for the Best Foreign Film, which is the Mussolini Cup. And with all of that, they didn't, I guess, feel that it could win that particular thing. That's why they gave him that other award that they kind of snuck in before they weren't allowed to do things like that. So,
how to do in the box office? I'm excited to hear just how much information you have.
Well, Pete, for an 83-year-old foreign film, it is ridiculous how much financial information is available out there for this. Let me tell you. Just kidding. There's really nothing.
I read just the first line of your notes earlier today. And I thought, oh wow, this is gonna be amazing.
Yeah, right.
This is amazing. This is the first time we actually have budget.
No. Yeah,
jerk.
there's really nothing. There is some box office information for several re-releases here, but nowhere is it clear which re-release, like what year, which country. So I just left it all empty because it's hard to say. I did, however, find this in the book Inside Oscar, which is all about the Academy Awards. So they had this to say: for a foreign language film, Grand Illusion did spectacularly well in the US, but it couldn't compare to the box office grosses of the latest Frank Capra paean to Individualism. You can't take it with you. So that's all I have. It did well in the United States, but not as well as Capra's film. All I can really tell you other than that is that it was released in France, June 8th, 1937. Then finally here in the United States, September 12th, 1938.
Well, that's something.
It is something.
It was a good experience. It was a good one to start out with. I'm excited about seeing where it stands on our respective lists here. Should we take it to the mat?
Let's do it.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel and you'll see all of the movies that we have talked about on this very show. If you want, you can swipe over in your show notes, tap the word flickchart, and it should take you straight to this film in our list where you can add it to your list and see how it stacks up against ours. It's been a long time since I've done that.
It has been.
I don't remember words that go after one another.
First up, Grand Illusion or La Cage aux Folles?
La Cage aux Folles.
Really? Wow. Yeah. Grand Illusion.
All right. Let's do it.
He was terrible to his husband in that film.
Oh, you're right. You can have it.
Okay. Grand Illusion.
You just don't have to be that surprised. I enjoyed this movie, but I don't know that I'm,
Yeah, you haven't seen it multiple times like I have.
Jesus.
Grand Illusion or Do the Right Thing?
Do the Right Thing.
Do the Right Thing. Grand Illusion or Arsenic and Old Lace? Your favorite Cary Grant mugging vehicle. I'd like to see Eric von Stroheim pull some of those faces.
I'll give it to Grand Illusion.
Grand Illusion, indeed. Grand Illusion or The Night of the Hunter? Ooh.
Night of the Hunter.
Night of the Hunter. Grand Illusion or The Bourne Identity?
Bourne Identity.
I am going to say Grand Illusion. If it was one of the other two, I might have picked them over it. And notice I said 2, not 5. Kind of forgetting those last
if
two Bourne films.
If it was the hit Jeremy Renner vehicle, Born Again.
Oh, it's a Grand Illusion for me, so we're going to have to Rochambeau it.
Okay.
All right, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Paper.
Scissors.
All right.
Grand Illusion takes it. Grand Illusion or The Silent Partner?
I'll give it to Grand Illusion.
I will give it to Grand Illusion. Grand Illusion or Contagion?
Idea vehicle. Grand Illusion with a little bit more disease.
They have a great conversation about disease. Can I just say, I loved that line in the film. Let me see. I wrote it down because I thought it was so great. Because speaking of class, we'd each die of our own class ailment if war didn't make all germs equal.
Right. I'm glad they were able to throw that bit of humanity in.
I'm going with Grand Illusion.
All right. That's fine.
Okay. Grand Illusion or The Adventures of Robin Hood? Oh, duking it out, 1938.
Adventures of Robin Hood.
I will say Grand Illusion.
Oh, really? I thought you were. Oh, I guess you've already said.
I have already said.
You know what? I'll give that to you. You can have that.
Okay.
I don't. We've reached the point where I just don't care.
That's right. Oh, finally, after 400 some episodes, right. We finally hit that point. Grand Illusion or Judo?
Judo.
I will say Grand Illusion. Here we go.
Really? Okay. Fine.
Yeah. No,
it's fine. It's fine.
I'm torn there, but I'm happy to give it to you. We're like, this is pretty much the
I don't
last
want
ranking.
your charity.
Okay, here we go then. 1, 2, 3. Rock.
All right.
Judo takes it.
You're welcome, Judo!
Grand Illusion ended up at spot 146 on our chart. 146 out of 461 films. That puts it at a 68%.
Well, that's something.
It's pretty low.
Okay. All right. How did it do on your personal list?
This went pretty high on my personal list. It landed in spot 555 out of 4,424 films, putting it at about an 87%.
Man, it turns out that both the numerator and the denominator are important because we're pretty close. Mine ended up at 458, but only out of 1,458 films.
Mm-hmm.
And so that puts it at 69%, Andy, which is exactly where I feel like it should be. I feel great about that. If I were to use that same math over at letterboxd.com/thenextreel, Flickchart suggests that should be a 3.5 star film. I'm going to nudge it up and give it a 4 star and a heart. But that feels like I felt when I watched this movie. Solid. I enjoyed it. Would watch it again. A little bit simple.
You know, I want to jump back real quick, Pete, now that you're giving it a ranking. Of the 10 films that we talked about that were nominated, have you seen, I know you've seen The Adventures of Robin Hood. Have you seen You Can't Take It With You, the movie that won?
Yes.
And I'm assuming you haven't seen the other 7.
I have not. Wait a minute. Let me get back.
Alexander's Ragtime Band, Boys Town, The Citadel, Four Daughters, Jezebel, Pygmalion, Test Pilot.
I'm sure I've seen Pygmalion, but I could not tell you.
Okay. Leslie Howard.
About it. Yeah.
Okay.
I would have, because it was one of those where we did the play in high school, and I'm sure that we watched the movie.
That's usually what people do. Yeah. When they're doing a play, they'll watch the movie too. Okay. Well, of those, would you put You Can't Take It With You as the winner, or Robin Hood, or Pygmalion, or this?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with You Can't Take It With You. I feel like I don't have the research to say anything else. I'm surprised that the way you talk about Test Pilot, man, I want to watch that. But maybe
it's a tricky one to find. Actually, I think I found that one on YouTube. I think somebody had loaded it up there. I don't know if it's still there or not.
I'm a little surprised that Boys Town you don't hold that in higher esteem. I've heard good things about that.
It's fine. It's Yeah.
No, but I would stick with You Can't Take It With You, and especially after watching this, I thought it was good. Doesn't live up to my memory of Yiktui.
You Can't Take It With You, I will say, on my most recent rewatch of it, it definitely felt bloated. It felt way too long. Yeah, I was like, we could have cut a half hour out of this and it would have been fine. So I think that's really what dropped it for me. But of the films, I mean, Grande Illusion, I think it's finally crested that point where it's become a 5-star film for me. My recent rewatches, it's slowly been going up. It was 4.5, and then this last time, it just like everything worked. So I'm saying 5 stars and a heart from me. So there it is.
Wow.
And I would have said this is the one that should have won over You Can't Take It With You. But in the past, I always said You Can't Take It With You was the best. So I feel like those two films really exemplify a great example of the films that came out that year. Adventures of Robin Hood, I don't know. It's a great film, I guess. And I can't remember, honestly, from our conversation about it. But I don't feel like it was the one I would have picked ever. Even though I think it's a great film.
Yeah, but it'd be the equivalent of like picking Fast and the Furious.
Well, I'd say maybe more The Dark Knight or
I'll give you that.
Inception or something. It's like the crowd pleaser.
It's the crowd pleaser. That's exactly what it is. So that's fine. All right. So we've kicked it off. We have started the series. Where do we go from here?
Well, now that we are finally getting this ball rolling, we're going to be jumping a number of years. We're going to be going to 1969 with the French film Z. Technically, it's kind of a French-Greek film, or Algerian-French. This is a political thriller directed by Costa Gavras, based on a novel, and it is about the events surrounding an assassination of a Greek politician. So that's where we'll be going to next. And this is, I will say, this is an example of the film that now, in 1957, they started the Best Foreign Language Film category.
Okay.
This is going to be our first example, and now we can start talking about this moving forward, of films that were nominated for Best Picture and Best Foreign Language Film, and won Best Foreign Language Film. because of the fact that it was nominated for both.
Our first Parasite pick.
When the movie ends,
Our conversation begins. Amazon giveth, Andy.
as Amazon always do it.
Oh, Andy, there are people who really don't like this movie.
Yes, there are some of those out there.
A few of them. They don't like to read their movies. That's fine. They're upset about English. That's fine. We don't need to talk about that. But we do have some people who just genuinely don't like the movie. Would you like to open the bidding?
I will, yes. I have Polsky777 gives it a 1 star, says World War I soap opera. What's so great about this movie? Extended to 2 hours, and for that reason, boring. Contains indecent behavior, indecent jokes, and blasphemy against God Jehovah.
That's a lot of capital letters right there in a row.
There are.
My goodness, that's
Shouting to the wind.
Intensity right there. Well, I have one from Mr. Know-It-All, who calls, in I think a fit of play on wordery, he calls it a bland delusion. Do you see what he did there?
Oh, Mr. Know-It-All, you should clearly be in all of these.
Yeah. Here we go. He said, at the risk of being ostracized by both the pretentious Cinema Know-It-All Society and the Woody Allen fan club. What? I must say that Grande Illusion is the hands-down winner in the category of most cosmically overrated piece of dreck. Even in the face of stiff competition from all too deserving fellow nominees such as Paths of Glory, Bonnie and Clyde, The Wild Bunch, and Citizen Kane, these others, like G.I., get 5-star ratings and are called classics, or at least classics of their genre. The first 3 are just crap, and Kane, while very good, simply does not deserve the oohs and ahs and best film ever ranking it so often receives. But in the field of overratedness, they all pale in comparison and shrink to insignificance beside Renoir's contribution. It offers an overdone theme, unimaginative staging, a hackneyed script, and 4th-grade pageant acting. The combined effect is the 20th century's best answer to insomnia since Ambien. Donnez-moi une break. Now, as you can imagine, the Amazon community has stepped in, and okay, people feel pretty strongly. Mostly, you can imagine they feel strongly for lumping this with Paths of Glory, Bonnie and Clyde, Wild Bunch, and Citizen Kane, all from different years. But you know, we have Zlewski, who says, "I don't applaud your courage for posting your honest opinion, as all opinions are not equal. Sad that you would review a film that's beyond your understanding. You're certainly not helping potential viewers. You're just announcing your ignorance in the grandest manner. For that, I do applaud you. Courageous indeed."
I like that somebody else actually looked at all of the films that Mr. Know-It-All has rated and found the 2 highest praised films by him, Me, Myself, and Irene, 5 stars, and Vertical Limit, 4.5 stars.
That is telling indeed.
Oh, Mr. Know-It-All, you put yourself out there.
You do. Thanks, Amazon. It's hard to believe we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
You're telling me producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a lot of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchase is made through our links. Give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We covered a lot of great movies that were adapted from other material in Season 10.
Our Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals is where listeners can purchase the source material behind all our adapted film discussions. It helps support the show at no extra cost when you buy through our links.
In our foreign language Best Picture nominees series, we looked at several adaptations, including Z, The Postman Il Postino, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Letters from Iwo Jima.
We hit the high seas with In the Heart of the Sea from Nathaniel Philbrick's nonfiction book for our Aquatic Killers series.
Definitely a weaker entry in that series.
I bet the book is better.
Oh, me too.
Member bonus episodes featured adaptations like Gone Girl, The Russia House, Ivanhoe, The Hot Rock, The Big Heat, and Naked Lunch.
Oliver Stone brought not just original stories, but also adaptations like Conan the Barbarian, Scarface, Year of the Dragon, 8 Million Ways to Die, Talk Radio, and Born on the 4th of July.
Mary Herron's disturbingly insightful American Psycho was adapted from the Bret Easton Ellis book.
You like Huey Lewis in the News?
Oh my God, it even has a watermark.
And of course, more Stephen King with The Mist, The Green Mile, and The Shawshank Redemption for our King a la Darabont series.
Find links to all of these books and more adapted films on our originals page. That's thenextreel.com/originals. Every purchase supports our show.
Get the full list of books that we've talked about and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.